Bids expected today from the US, from the Middle East, from Sir Jim Ratcliffe, as today is the, quote, soft deadline for bids from Manchester United. But of course we know, Simon, and we'll discover this later on the show, there is considerable pushback on any bid from Qatar. You and I and Stuart were there, of course, for the World Cup. It would be maintained by the Qataris that any bid from Qatar would be totally separate from the state, and that would get round any rules of conflict. There is scepticism around that viewpoint. How does football untangle separation issues should bids from the Middle East, as expected, arrive today before the soft deadline?
Well, it doesn't, does it? I mean, first of all, I don't know what a soft deadline is. I've never heard of such a thing. Is it a media term now? Soft deadline, indicative offers. I'm really not quite sure why we suddenly.
Well, it's kind of soft in that if you don't make it, there's always another one.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's no such thing, is it? Really, you either make a bid or you don't. Look, the bottom line is that football hasn't handled separation in previous incarnations. Separation of state ownership for the Newcastle purchase was a myth. The idea that the Premier League had managed to obtain an undertaking from PIF, this was nothing to do with the state, is preposterous nonsense, propaganda. All it was designed to do was get around people like Amnesty International, suggesting that this was an awful bid owned by a state that breaches every single human rights that one could shake a stick at. And it was designed just to get people back in their boxes.
But Newcastle did it.
But that's my point. It was subterfuge. It was nonsense. This is what we should be worried about, because the Premier League accepted.
But the authorities proved that PIF was separate from the state.
But they didn't. What they did was they got an undertaking. It can't possibly be separate from the state. It's a sovereign wealth fund managed by, under the auspice of Mohammed bin Salman, who is the ultimate ruler in Saudi. It's nonsense. It's preposterous. It's ridiculous. It was designed to get around the adverse publicity that, Amnesty International and those sort of people would say, hang on a second, how can that happen? The real issue, everybody with a brain, with all due respect to Newcastle fans, was piracy. And the moment that issue was put away, then all of a sudden, we've got to deal with this now. We've got to deal with a separation issue. I know. Let's get a letter from them saying that that it's not state-owned. Rubbish. Anyway, that shows you how they deal with separation. This one is slightly more difficult, because this has a bigger sting in the tail. This isn't listening to background noise from human rights issues around, not that it's background noise, by the way, but actually in terms of influence over football.
No, I understand.
Right. This separation issue is about how do you put into position a majority situation of another football club into the ownership of one of the iconic football clubs in England, or any football club of standing.
Yeah.
And this is the question that needs to be answered, and these are the tests that need to be proven. So it's going to be held up to the highest of scrutiny. We may not like the notion that there's a potential fox in the hen house that may own one football club and dress itself up as another. And it's very difficult to see, given the nature of the structure of wealth in Qatar, with all due respect to those that we know and the things that we've seen, how it's not going to have some degree of state influence in it, in the same way that QSI owned PSG. They'll say it's not going to be a vehicle owned by the state. I don't understand how they're going to get wealth from individuals in Qatar that aren't already part of the state makeup themselves. So it becomes a conundrum. The question is how keen is football to make sure that this doesn't become a real problem? And I think because of the nature of the football club, Newcastle United at the time is a blip on the world stage. Manchester United is arguably the most iconic football club in world football. You ain't going to get away without proper scrutiny on this.
And because of that, because of their standing in world football, would Manchester United be accorded any exemptions in this process?
Good God, no. I tell you who will want exemptions and who wouldn't care less who they sold it to. The Glazers, right? So don't expect them to hold it to the high standards.
Right.
It's incumbent upon football.
But if it's established that the Qataris who are in at PSG are one group and a bidding group from Qatar for Manchester United is another, then that's fine, isn't it?
Well, you're going to get into an unseemly mess, right? Because there's going to be the allegation that's already being put forward by a variety of human rights organisations. One of them, I believe, are coming on today, that do their diligence, do their research and look behind these things. And they're going to hold their feet to the fire, and they're going to have to prove without any subterfuge that they are. Now, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove something that doesn't exist at this moment in time? No, it's over here. No, that's not. It's over there. No, it's not this. It's that. It's something else. The difficulty is that given the structure of Qatar and the wealth that's been brought through Qatar and the people that have the wealth, there are inextricable links between those that have the wealth and the state.
Yeah, I've got you. But we heard Alex Crook and Stuart, I'm coming to this because you were in Qatar and you observed many things when we were out there. We heard Alex Crook say in the half-10 bulletin there that the Qatari bid has become the favourite bid to take over Manchester United.
Well,
so at this stage in the proceedings,
they haven't made a bid yet, have they? And
how could that be possible?
Well, they haven't made a bid at this moment in time. And
they've got one lined up. We know that.
Where we are in the structure of things is that there is a stage where people are coming to the table. The deals themselves will consist of a variety of different nuances and peculiarities. First of all, the business has got to be delisted anyway from the New York Stock Exchange. So there's a variety of different things that are going to happen with this business. But this one is not going to go under the radar. Newcastle was a noisy transaction. It was a noisy transaction because of the nature of the ownership model.
Yeah.
Imagine the noise if it's Manchester United. The noise will go through the ceilings, and it'll be interesting to see all those, people like Gary Neville that talked about workers' rights and so on and so forth, a bit mute at the moment in time. It'll be interesting to see how we hear from the Man United Supporters Trust, who of course want their football club back, which they won't be getting back anytime soon because it will belong to someone else.
See, you were there, Stuart, with us. The Qataris will argue, as they did in the World Cup, in their winning of the World Cup, it was done on merit. And we're there on merit. They'll argue that this bid is a honest, true bid, non-state related, and they'll invite you to investigate that because that's what they're like. They positively encourage transparency of themselves.
Well, I really don't know. Are there a set sort of guidelines that everyone has to meet in regard to the ownership of football?
Well, there
clubs?
is. There's no guidelines
feast?
around state ownership.
Yeah.
The idea that state ownership is outlawed is drivel. State ownership exists. Sheikh Mansour is in a position where almost state ownership is part of Manchester City. There's no outlawing state ownership. You don't like it. The reason why they don't like state ownership is because it depends which state it is. If it's a Middle Eastern state with all the human rights issues that other people have with it, they're going to have a PR issue. So there's no outlawing of state ownership. The problem is if it's proved to be indexed to Qatar and Qatari state ownership, they already own PSG. So something has got to change in the configuration of how they own Manchester United or PSG.
What about Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the ownership of Nice?
Again, the same question has to come into play. Ultimately, how do you have a majority shareholding in one football? Because you cannot have influence in two football clubs. You cannot have a majority. You can have shares in more than one football club, but you cannot have a majority influence.
So if the Premier League got a problem here, Simon, if the Saudis come on the horizon with a hard and fast bid for Manchester United...
Again, they will have to prove beyond all reasonable doubts, getting into terminologies that people may or may not understand, beyond all reasonable doubt, that any bid for a club that's owned, that has an ownership model similar to another football club, has to be clear that this is not a majority shareholding in two football clubs. The rules on that side of things are very clear. You cannot own a majority shareholding in two football clubs in professional football. It doesn't matter if the one football club's in League 2 of the Championship and the other one's in La Ligue. You have to be able to exhibit that you aren't a majority shareholder in two professional football clubs.